just 4 minutes before palace staff believed preparations for Prince George's birthday reception were complete, Prince William reportedly issued a quiet but devastating order that sent shockwaves through Clarence House corridors. Several of Queen Camilla's longtime aides were suddenly removed from key ceremonial access lists without explanation. What looked like a minor staffing adjustment quickly became something far more explosive, a calculated royal purge unfolding behind gilded palace doors. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Reports suggest the order arrived with almost surgical precision. There was no dramatic confrontation in public view, no raised voices echoing through palace hallways, and certainly no official acknowledgement from Kensington Palace. Yet according to various interpretations from palace administrative circles, the effect was immediate. Names that had reportedly appeared on internal coordination lists for weeks suddenly vanished. Access credentials tied to senior reception planning were allegedly deactivated within minutes. Staff members who had spent years operating comfortably within Queen Camilla's orbit reportedly found themselves standing outside rooms they once entered without hesitation. And inside the palace, confusion spread with chilling speed. Insiders whisper that several junior aides initially believed it had to be a technical mistake. After all, George's birthday reception was expected to project stability, continuity, and unity at a moment when the monarchy could least afford visible fractures. King Charles's ongoing health struggles since early 2024 had already cast a long shadow over royal operations, forcing senior households into increasingly delicate negotiations over influence and control. But according to palace sources familiar with the reception's planning, tensions between Kensington Palace and Camilla's inner circle had been quietly escalating for weeks before the event ever began. Different interpretations of those tensions paint an increasingly icy picture. Some reports suggest Prince William had grown frustrated with what allies allegedly described as competing authority streams emerging from Clarence House. Others claim senior figures close to Catherine became deeply concerned about operational leaks surrounding Private Wales family events. Whatever the true catalyst may have been, palace insiders insist the atmosphere behind closed doors had become unusually unforgiving. Meetings reportedly became shorter, communication channels narrowed. Trusted figures were suddenly excluded from strategic conversations involving George, Charlotte, and Louis. What once appeared to be a functioning royal partnership increasingly resembled bureaucratic warfare unfolding beneath layers of ceremonial tradition. The timing only intensified the speculation. Why would William reportedly authorize such disruptive changes mere minutes before one of the most carefully observed private royal gatherings of the year? Why risk confusion among palace staff during an event centered around the future king's eldest son? Royal commentators from publications including The Times and Tatler have quietly hinted that the answer may lie far beyond a single reception. According to several palace administrative whispers, George's birthday simply became the stage upon which a much deeper power struggle finally surfaced. Observers present during the early arrivals reportedly noticed subtle but unmistakable signs of strain. William, often described publicly as controlled and diplomatic, allegedly appeared unusually cold during pre-event greetings. Conversations were brief. Smiles appeared measured rather than warm. Several longtime royal aides reportedly avoided eye contact altogether as last-minute adjustments rippled through operational teams. Even veteran palace staff, individuals accustomed to the monarchy's rigid hierarchies and silent rivalries, allegedly sensed that something significant had shifted. And perhaps most revealing of all was the silence that followed. Senior courtiers were reportedly instructed to steer media teams away from any discussion regarding staffing irregularities. No explanation was offered publicly. No clarification emerged privately. The entire situation appeared to vanish behind the same impenetrable wall of discretion that has protected royal crises for generations. Yet within palace circles, the whispers only grew louder. Some described it as William consolidating authority ahead of the inevitable transition to his future reign. Others framed it as the beginning of a far more deliberate effort to reduce the influence of Camilla's household over the monarchy's next generation. But this was not merely about seating charts or guest access, it was reportedly tied to a far larger battle over influence inside the monarchy itself. behind the polished smiles and ceremonial pageant. Satire, insiders whisper that Prince William had already begun activating what palace veterans allegedly call the Heirs Accord, a quiet alliance designed to consolidate the future of the crown around George's generation. And according to reports, Camilla's faction was increasingly viewed as an obstacle rather than an ally. The alleged removal of several Camilla-linked aides from Prince George's birthday reception was not, according to royal commentators, an isolated incident born from temporary frustration. Palace administrative streams, ranging from long-standing household staff to figures familiar with Kensington Palace operations, suggest the move may have been part of a much broader strategy quietly taking shape behind the walls of the monarchy. A strategy not centered on revenge or emotion, but on succession, discipline, and control. And at the heart of those whispers sits the increasingly discussed phrase now circulating through royal circles: the Heirs Accord. Different interpretations of the accord describe it as an informal but deeply influential understanding between Prince William, Catherine, and a trusted network of senior royal advisors who allegedly believe the monarchy has entered one of its most fragile transitions in decades. King Charles's ongoing health battle since early 2024 reportedly accelerated fears inside the institution that the crown could become vulnerable to internal fragmentation precisely at the moment stability mattered most. Those close to the Duchy of Cornwall's rigid standards allegedly viewed George, Charlotte, and Louis not merely as royal children, but as the long-term foundation upon which the future legitimacy of the monarchy would depend. That distinction changed everything. Reports suggest William became increasingly determined to shield his children from what insiders describe as palace factionalism, the quiet but ruthless competition between competing royal households, advisors, and influence networks that have historically flourished during uncertain reigns. And according to several palace whispers, Camilla's expanding circle of trusted aides began attracting growing scrutiny from figures close to the Wales household. Some allegedly feared that Clarence House loyalists had accumulated too much soft influence over ceremonial planning, internal communications, and strategic access to the king himself during a period of physical vulnerability. Royal historians have pointed out that succession eras have always triggered internal restructuring inside the House of Windsor. During previous reign transitions, households were reorganized, advisors quietly replaced, and influence redistributed long before the public fully understood what was happening. But what makes the current situation particularly explosive, according to commentators like Ingrid Seward and Robert Hardman, is the speed at which William reportedly appears to be consolidating operational authority while Charles remains on the throne. Insiders claim the shift has been subtle, almost invisible to the public eye. Meetings once coordinated jointly are allegedly being redirected through Kensington Palace channels. Ceremonial approvals reportedly require tighter oversight. Trusted William allies have quietly gained larger administrative roles surrounding future royal events tied to George, Charlotte, and Louis. Even seemingly minor adjustments to schedules or guest management are now interpreted by palace veterans as signs that William is preparing for a monarchy centered less around overlapping royal courts and more around a singular line of succession. And within that environment, Camilla's household reportedly began facing resistance unlike anything seen since the early days of Charles's reign. Some insiders describe the atmosphere as Cold Warfare mode, not open conflict, not dramatic confrontation. Something quieter, more calculated, influence reduced through process, access narrowed through protocol, authority challenged not through public humiliation, but through administrative isolation. The alleged reception purge therefore became symbolic of something far more significant than staffing changes. It was interpreted by some as a warning that the balance of power inside the monarchy was shifting toward the next generation faster than many had anticipated. What makes the situation even more delicate is Charles himself. Reports consistently describe the king as emotionally exhausted, physically weakened, and increasingly dependent on tightly controlled household structures to maintain stability during treatment. That vulnerability, insiders whisper, has created competing visions for how the monarchy should function moving forward. One side allegedly favors preserving Camilla's long-standing domestic influence within palace operations. The other appears increasingly committed to creating a streamlined future centered firmly around William and his children. And while the public celebrated George's milestone, China, another quieter drama was reportedly unfolding behind closed palace doors. For years, Queen Camilla's aides were considered untouchable fixtures within royal operations, guardians of access, gatekeepers of schedules, and silent architects of domestic diplomacy. But reports now suggest that protection may have suddenly evaporated in the days leading up to George's reception. To the public, they were almost invisible figures. Their names rarely appeared in headlines, and their influence was seldom acknowledged openly. Yet according to palace insiders, several members of Camilla's trusted inner circle had quietly become some of the most connected operators inside the modern monarchy. They reportedly managed sensitive scheduling discussions, coordinated private introductions, controlled access to informal royal gatherings, and acted as trusted intermediaries during moments of internal friction within the House of Windsor. In many ways, they were viewed as the stabilizing machinery behind Camilla's rise from controversial outsider to queen consort. But insiders now whisper that the very influence which once protected them may have ultimately triggered the backlash now unfolding behind palace walls. Reports suggest the first warning signs emerged weeks before Prince George's birthday reception. According to various interpretations from administrative staff familiar with Kensington Palace coordination meetings, certain aides closely linked to Camilla allegedly began experiencing subtle but unmistakable restrictions. Invitations to planning discussions reportedly became inconsistent. Access to updated ceremonial briefings narrowed. Long-standing assumptions about operational authority suddenly appeared uncertain. What initially seemed like routine bureaucratic adjustments soon evolved into something far colder and far more deliberate. Sources close to royal household operations claim that several senior advisors tied to Clarence House were quietly excluded from strategic planning sessions connected to future Wales family events. No explanation was allegedly offered. Some insiders interpreted the move as standard succession-era restructuring. Others viewed it as a calculated message from William's office that the balance of influence was changing. And as those rumors spread deeper into palace corridors, the atmosphere reportedly became increasingly tense. One palace staffer allegedly described the internal mood as icy and unforgiving. Another claimed longtime working relationships suddenly felt strained by suspicion and silence. Conversations reportedly shortened whenever certain names entered the room. Staff who once operated comfortably between royal households allegedly found themselves forced to navigate invisible political fault lines. Even routine ceremonial coordination became, according to insiders, a delicate exercise in loyalty and caution. At the center of the growing speculation sat Prince William himself. Royal commentators increasingly suggest that William has entered a far more assertive phase behind closed doors than the public fully realizes. Those familiar with Kensington Palace operations claim his office has been quietly conducting operational reviews tied not only to ceremonial planning, but to long-term institutional structure. Reports suggest the future king has become deeply focused on tightening internal discipline around the Wales household while reducing what some allies allegedly view as overlapping centers of influence surrounding Charles and Camilla. That shift has not gone unnoticed among royal observers. Media insiders from the Times and Tatler have quietly referenced unusual changes in protocol authority, particularly surrounding events centered on George, Charlotte, and Louis. Certain decisions once managed jointly between royal households now reportedly flow directly through William's senior advisors. Even ceremonial logistics, traditionally governed through carefully shared arrangements, appear increasingly centralized under Kensington Palace oversight. For palace veterans, the pattern feels hauntingly familiar. Historians of the monarchy often note that household restructurings tend to emerge long before formal transitions of power become public reality. During previous succession periods, influence rarely disappeared through dramatic dismissals. Instead, authority was slowly redirected through procedure, hierarchy, and access. The same people who once shaped royal operations suddenly discovered meetings proceeding without them. Calls returned more slowly. Invitations quietly stopped arriving. According to some insiders, that exact process may now be unfolding again. And perhaps most damaging of all is the growing speculation surrounding distrust between the Wales household and Camilla's circle. Reports suggest William's allies became increasingly concerned about competing agendas emerging within the king's weakened court during Charles's ongoing health struggles. Some allege silence. The kind DLY feared too many sensitive operational decisions were being filtered through figures loyal primarily to Camilla rather than the future structure of the crown itself. Whether justified or not, those suspicions appear to have fundamentally altered the internal chemistry of royal operations. But the most revealing moment came not from official announcements but from what guests allegedly witnessed during the reception itself. Guests arriving beneath the glowing palace chandeliers reportedly sensed something was wrong almost immediately. The warmth traditionally associated with royal family celebrations appeared replaced by controlled formality, measured smiles, and a silence that insiders later described as surgical. Prince George's birthday reception had been expected to project continuity and calm at a moment when the monarchy desperately needed both. Publicly, the gathering represented the future of the crown gathered under one roof, the young prince standing at the symbolic center of a dynasty attempting to reassure the nation during a period of uncertainty surrounding King Charles's health. Yet according to multiple palace observers, the atmosphere inside the reception never fully settled into the warmth normally associated with royal family occasions. Something quieter lingered beneath the carefully managed composure, something tense. And many insiders now believe that tension reflected far more than ordinary family strain. Reports suggest one of the first details noticed by longtime guests was the absence of several familiar figures traditionally associated with Queen Camilla's household operations. Certain aides who had reportedly attended major royal functions for years were suddenly nowhere to be seen during key phases of the evening's coordination. At first, some attendees allegedly assumed the missing staff members had simply been reassigned temporarily. But as the night progressed and operational responsibilities appeared redistributed among figures closely aligned with Kensington Palace, whispers began circulating quietly between senior guests. Those whispers only intensified as William and Catherine reportedly maintained an unusually disciplined presence throughout the evening. Royal commentators later observed that the Prince and Princess of Wales appeared tightly synchronized during every major interaction surrounding the reception. Conversations were controlled, movements reportedly precise. According to insiders familiar with palace dynamics, the level of coordination allegedly signaled more than simple professionalism. It reflected preparation, deliberate preparation. Some interpreted it as evidence that William and Catherine were consciously presenting themselves not merely as senior royals, but as the stabilizing nucleus of the monarchy's future structure, and beside them stood a visibly different King Charles. Guests reportedly described the monarch as fatigued and emotionally distant during several portions of the evening. Sources close to palace circles claim Charles appeared increasingly dependent on brief private pauses away from larger gatherings as the night continued. While no official concern was expressed publicly, many observers quietly connected the king's subdued demeanor to the immense physical and emotional strain he has reportedly endured since his cancer diagnosis in early 2024. But according to some insiders, Charles's exhaustion may not have been solely physical. Palace whispers increasingly suggest the king has found himself caught between competing forces within his own institution, loyalty to Camilla on one side, and the accelerating authority of William on the other. Even the reception's seating arrangements reportedly fueled speculation. Palace observers noted subtle but highly unusual positioning changes among senior royal figures during portions of the evening. While outwardly insignificant to casual attendees, veteran royal watchers understand that seating dynamics inside the monarchy often carry symbolic weight. Who enters first? Who stands beside whom? Which household coordinates guest flow? These details, though rarely acknowledged publicly, form part of the monarchy's deeply coded internal language of hierarchy and influence. And according to several commentators, George's reception appeared filled with quiet indicators that Kensington Palace was increasingly asserting operational dominance. By the following morning, media insiders had already begun questioning why several longtime palace staff figures associated with Camilla's orbit had seemingly vanished from visible event operations altogether. Royal commentators dissected body language, conversational distance, and procedural irregularities with growing fascination. Some described William as colder than usual, others pointed to Catherine's composed but guarded demeanor throughout the evening. Even minor moments became subjects of analysis as speculation surrounding the alleged palace power struggle. CA intensified across royal media circles, but perhaps the most important shift was psychological. For years, William had often been portrayed publicly as the patient heir waiting respectfully beside his father's reign. Yet George's birthday reception reportedly altered that perception for many palace insiders. Increasingly, the event was viewed not as a simple family celebration, but as a symbolic preview of the monarchy William intends to build disciplined, centralized, tightly managed, and far less tolerant of divided influence within royal operations. Yet behind the polished photographs and carefully managed optics, insiders whisper that William's actions may have carried a much deeper warning. As King Charles continues his grueling health battle, reports suggest the balance of power inside the monarchy has begun shifting faster than the public realizes. And according to palace administrative whispers, George's birthday reception may have marked one of the clearest signs yet that William is no longer simply preparing for the future, he is actively shaping it. For much of his reign, King Charles reportedly attempted to maintain a delicate equilibrium between the competing personalities and power centers surrounding the modern monarchy. But insiders now suggest that balancing act has become increasingly difficult as the king's health struggles continue to place enormous strain on palace operations. Since early 2024, reports of treatment schedules, reduced appearances, and shortened engagements have quietly transformed the internal structure of royal decision-making. While Charles remains firmly on the throne, many observers believe the institution itself has already begun adapting to a future that feels far closer than palace officials are willing to publicly acknowledge. And in moments of institutional uncertainty, power rarely remains still. Sources familiar with palace administration claim Charles has become increasingly reliant on a tight network of household structures to maintain continuity during periods of physical exhaustion. Yet according to several insiders, that dependence may have unintentionally intensified competition between rival royal circles seeking greater influence over the monarchy's operational future. Clarence House loyalists allegedly continue attempting to preserve the authority and ceremonial presence that emerged during Charles and Camilla's rise to the throne. But within Kensington Palace, reports suggest William has become far more determined to centralize control around the Wales household and the next generation of heirs. The shift, according to royal commentators, is no longer subtle. Over recent months, William has reportedly assumed increasing authority over ceremonial logistics tied to major royal events involving George, Charlotte, and Louis. Decisions once handled collaboratively between royal households are allegedly being redirected through Kensington Palace channels. Senior aides close to William have reportedly gained expanded oversight over scheduling coordination, guest management, and strategic communications surrounding future-facing royal appearances. Some insiders describe the process not as a rebellion against Charles, but as a calculated preparation for institutional survival during an era of mounting instability. Yet survival inside the House of Windsor has always come at a cost. Palace whispers increasingly point toward growing concerns over competing factions operating within what some commentators now call the weakened court. On one side stand figures viewed as loyal to Camilla's long-standing domestic influence. On the other stand those allegedly aligned with William's increasingly disciplined vision for the monarchy's future. Reports suggest the Prince of Wales has become deeply wary of overlapping advisory structures capable of diluting authority during a transitional era. And according to insiders, George's birthday reception exposed just how serious those concerns may have become. Camilla's influence, once seen as firmly embedded within palace life, now reportedly faces quiet but unmistakable resistance. Not through dramatic confrontation or public humiliation, but through a colder and far more effective mechanism: bureaucratic warfare. Access shifts, meeting exclusions, operational restructuring. The monarchy, historians often note, rarely wages open internal battles. Instead, it reorders itself through silence, protocol, and gradual isolation. Some palace veterans believe exactly that process is unfolding now. Royal experts have drawn striking parallels to earlier periods of royal transition, when future monarchs quietly consolidated authority long before official succession arrived. During the late years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, operational responsibilities increasingly migrated toward Charles behind closed doors. Before that, similar restructurings reportedly unfolded during the final years of King George VI. In each case, the institution, silence, the kind N moved carefully to preserve continuity while minimizing public panic. But according to several commentators, William's approach appears more ambitious, more disciplined, and perhaps far less tolerant of divided influence. At the center of that philosophy sits a phrase deeply embedded within royal survival itself: the firm before the family. Reports suggest William increasingly views the monarchy not as a collection of competing personalities, but as an institution that can only survive through unity, clarity, and centralized authority. Those close to palace operations claim he favors a streamlined monarchy with tighter operational control and fewer competing household structures capable of generating internal instability. To his allies, that approach represents necessary modernization during a period of vulnerability. To critics, however, it risks creating an increasingly unforgiving environment where loyalty outweighs personal relationships. And then came the moment that reportedly confirmed this was no temporary disagreement, but part of a permanent recalibration. According to insiders, the realization struck not during speeches or ceremonies, but through access badges, revised schedules, and suddenly unanswered calls. One by one, familiar palace figures reportedly discovered that their influence had quietly vanished overnight. In the days following Prince George's birthday reception, palace administrative corridors allegedly entered what one insider described as controlled silence. There were no formal announcements, no public dismissals, no dramatic confrontations leaking into headlines. Yet beneath the carefully preserved image of royal stability, reports suggest an internal transformation had already begun accelerating with chilling precision. Staff who had operated comfortably within Queen Camilla's orbit for years allegedly found themselves encountering subtle but devastating changes to the structure of palace life. Communication chains shifted. Responsibilities disappeared. Invitations reportedly stopped arriving without explanation. And according to several palace whispers, the speed of the transition left even veteran courtiers stunned. Sources familiar with royal household operations claim multiple aides connected to Camilla quietly lost significant logistical authority in the immediate aftermath of the reception. Some reportedly discovered that future Wales family coordination no longer flowed through channels they had helped oversee for years. Others allegedly learned that ceremonial approvals connected to George, Charlotte, and Louis had been redirected entirely through Kensington Palace oversight. On paper, many of the changes appeared procedural. In reality, insiders whisper they represented something far more consequential, a deliberate redistribution of institutional power. Perhaps the clearest sign of that shift emerged through communication itself. According to reports circulating within palace administrative circles, staff members were allegedly instructed to reroute sensitive coordination requests directly through Kensington Palace, rather than Clarence House intermediaries. To outsiders, the adjustment may have sounded insignificant, but inside the monarchy's deeply hierarchical structure, communication channels are power. Control the flow of information, and you control influence. Palace veterans understand this better than anyone. That is why, according to insiders, the sudden rerouting of operational authority triggered immediate alarm among several long-established royal aides. Some commentators now describe the process as a silent restructuring. No single dramatic decision revealed the full scope of the alleged transformation. Instead, the monarchy reportedly began reshaping itself through dozens of smaller adjustments unfolding simultaneously behind closed doors. Scheduling oversight tightened, access narrowed, advisory roles shifted quietly toward figures viewed as loyal to William's long-term institutional vision. Even staff assignments connected to future royal engagements reportedly began changing with little public explanation. Several insiders claim aides historically associated with Camilla's household were reassigned away from upcoming Wales family events altogether. Others allegedly found themselves excluded from planning discussions where they once held considerable influence. According to palace whispers, the message became impossible to ignore. The operational center of gravity inside the monarchy was moving decisively toward William. Yet what makes the situation particularly unsettling is the emotional restraint surrounding it all. Royal commentators repeatedly emphasize that William's reported actions appear strategic rather than personal. There have been no public accusations, no emotional outbursts, no visible declarations of conflict. Instead, insiders describe a colder philosophy now shaping palace operations, one rooted not in family loyalty, but in institution. Silence, the kind universal preservation. Those allegedly aligned with William's thinking increasingly frame the monarchy as a structure that cannot survive divided authority during a period of national and internal uncertainty. To them, streamlining influence is not cruelty, it is survival. Still, the emotional consequences inside palace walls have reportedly been severe. Some insiders whisper that a growing "the party is over" sentiment has settled over portions of Camilla's wider circle. Figures once viewed as permanently embedded within royal operations now allegedly find themselves navigating an atmosphere filled with caution and insecurity. Relationships that took decades to build appear increasingly fragile, and behind the silence, many reportedly fear that George's reception was not an isolated correction, but the opening stage of a much broader institutional consolidation. What remains perhaps most extraordinary is how little of this upheaval the public has truly seen. Beyond carefully curated photographs and official statements, the monarchy continues projecting composure and continuity to the world. Yet, according to those familiar with palace dynamics, an extraordinary struggle over influence, succession, and control may already be unfolding beneath the surface with remarkable intensity. But while aides disappeared from corridors and planning meetings, attention soon turned toward the person caught in the middle of it all. At the center of the growing divide reportedly stood King Charles himself, physically weakened, emotionally strained, and increasingly trapped between loyalty to his wife and the future being forged by his heir. For much of his life, Charles waited beneath the enormous shadow of history, preparing for a crown that seemed forever just beyond reach. And when the throne finally arrived, it came not with triumphal ease, but during one of the most turbulent and emotionally fragile periods the modern monarchy had faced in decades. Reports suggest that since early 2024, the king's ongoing health struggles have transformed not only his public schedule, but the emotional balance within the royal institution itself. Palace insiders whisper that exhaustion has settled heavily over the monarch, leaving him increasingly dependent on those closest to him while simultaneously forcing him to confront painful realities about the future of the crown. According to various interpretations from royal commentators, Charles reportedly attempted for months to preserve peace between the competing households surrounding him. On one side stood Queen Camilla and the loyal network of aides who had spent years helping stabilize his public image and private life. On the other stood Prince William, increasingly determined to shape a future monarchy built around discipline, unity, and operational control. Sources close to palace circles suggest Charles desperately hoped those worlds could coexist, but insiders now whisper that George's birthday reception revealed just how impossible that balance may have become. The emotional weight of that realization reportedly fell hardest on Charles himself. Guests at the reception allegedly noticed moments where the king appeared unusually withdrawn, as though carrying the burden of forces moving beyond his ability to fully contain. Some insiders claim Charles understood exactly what the quiet restructuring surrounding William's actions represented. Not rebellion, not cruelty, something colder. The natural transfer of institutional gravity from one reign toward the next. And for a monarch already battling physical exhaustion, the realization reportedly carried devastating emotional consequences. At the same time, reports suggest supporters within Camilla's wider circle viewed the removals and operational shifts as deeply humiliating. For years, they had reportedly believed their place within royal operations was secure after enduring decades of public scrutiny during Charles and Camilla's long and controversial journey to the throne. Many insiders allegedly saw themselves as loyal defenders of the king during periods when public acceptance of Camilla remained uncertain. That is why, according to palace whispers, the sudden reduction of influence surrounding George's reception felt not merely administrative, but personal. Royal historians have compared the atmosphere to earlier succession-era fractures that quietly reshaped the monarchy behind closed doors. During previous royal transitions, aging sovereigns often found themselves emotionally stranded between preserving existing loyalties and accepting the institutional demands of the future. Historians frequently point to the final years of Queen Victoria, George V, and even Queen Elizabeth II as periods where internal power structures slowly shifted long before the public fully recognized the transformation underway. But according to several commentators, the current transition feels unusually accelerated because of Charles's health challenge. And William's increasingly assertive approach, and through it all, Catherine reportedly emerged as one of the monarchy's key stabilizing figures. Sources close to palace operations suggest the Princess of Wales has played an essential role in maintaining calm within William's increasingly disciplined inner circle. While William allegedly focused on institutional restructuring, Catherine reportedly concentrated on preserving emotional continuity around George, Charlotte, and Louis during a period of mounting tension. Royal observers have repeatedly noted her carefully measured presence throughout recent public appearances, interpreting it as part of a broader effort to project steadiness while the monarchy quietly reorganizes itself behind closed doors. Because ultimately, insiders whisper this was never simply about personal relationships. It was about survival. The monarchy now appears to be entering a new era defined less by overlapping personalities and more by structure, hierarchy, and control. According to palace commentators, William increasingly views emotional ambiguity inside royal operations as a risk the institution can no longer afford during a period of national uncertainty. That philosophy reportedly explains the colder, more calculated nature of the recent restructuring. Loyalty to the crown itself is allegedly becoming more important than loyalty to individual households. And in the end, the true significance of George's birthday reception may have had little to do with celebration at all,